All right, let's dive in. Today, we're going to be looking at offenses against public justice.
Yeah, these are the things that really make those courtroom dramas so interesting.
Yeah, exactly. But, it's not all fiction, is it? These offenses have real-world consequences.
Absolutely. They can really shake the foundations of the justice system.
So for this deep dive, we're using pasted text,
Okay.
specifically Chapter 14,
Right.
which deals with false evidence and all those offenses against public justice.
Yeah.
And to help us make sense of all this, we have our expert here
Happy to be here.
who can cut through the legal jargon and explain not just what the law says, but also why it matters. So let's get started.
Okay.
What exactly does giving false evidence mean?
Well, a lot of people think it's just, lying in court.
Right.
But it's actually broader than that.
Oh.
It's any statement that you make knowing it's false when you're, legally obligated to tell the truth.
So if I say something I think is false, but it turns out to be true, can I still get in trouble?
Yeah, that's right. The law cares about what you believed at the time, not what turned out to be true later. For example, the text gives a scenario
Okay.
where someone swears they saw somebody at a specific place and a specific day, but they don't actually know if it's true.
Right.
That's considered giving false evidence,
Wow.
regardless of whether the person was actually there or not.
Most people wouldn't think that counts.
Yeah,
It really shows how careful you have to be, in legal situations.
absolutely.
Okay, so let's move on to fabricating false evidence. This sounds pretty serious.
It is.
So we're talking about things like planting evidence, making fake documents, messing with records.
Right, all those things.
Okay.
But the key thing here is the intent, the intention to mislead.
So you're saying it has to be deliberate.
Exactly. There has to be a plan to use that, that fake evidence in a legal case.
So, like accidentally mixing up some files, that's not going to land you in jail.
No.
But that example from the text, the one where they plant jewels in someone's stuff to make it look like they're a thief, that's different.
Right. Yeah.
And the punishments for these things, for giving or fabricating false evidence, what are we talking about?
Well, it depends on how serious the crime is that the false evidence is trying to cover up.
Makes sense.
For basic false evidence, the punishment can be up to 7 years in prison,
7 years?
plus a fine.
Wow, that's not a light sentence.
No, it's not.
And it gets even more serious.
It does. If you fabricate evidence to get someone convicted of a capital offense,
Yeah,
that's, a very serious crime,
right.
you could be facing life in prison,
Oh, wow.
or at least 10 years of rigorous imprisonment and a big fine.
That's heavy.
And if that fabricated evidence leads to an innocent person being executed,
Oh, gosh.
the person who made the evidence could face the death penalty.
So it's not just about, bending the truth. It's about destroying lives.
Absolutely.
Now, you mentioned earlier that it's not just lying or fabricating. There's also coercion. What does that mean in this context?
Well, it's basically forcing someone to lie for you.
Right.
Even just threatening someone, like threatening to hurt them, to damage their reputation, or, to mess with their property. That's a crime.
So even the threat itself is enough?
Yeah.
That's scary.
And it's punishable by up to 7 years in prison and a fine as well.
So you don't even have to actually hurt them.
Right.
Just the threat is enough.
Exactly. The law understands how much pressure those threats can put on someone.
Right?
And if that pressure leads to false testimony, especially testimony that gets an innocent person sentenced to death or to more than 7 years in prison, the penalties get even tougher.
How much tougher are we talking?
The person making the threats can face the same punishment that the innocent person got.
Wow.
So it's a very serious offense.
It really shows how seriously the law takes, trying to get someone to lie for you.
It does.
So we've talked about lying, fabricating, and coercing. What about using false evidence that you know is fake?
Right, yeah. That's a separate offense as well.
It is.
It's treated the same as giving or fabricating false evidence.
So it doesn't matter if you made it or just used it. If you know it's fake, you're in trouble.
The consequences are the same.
Okay, so it's not just stumbling across something and using it by accident. You have to know it's fake and still choose to use it.
Exactly.
Let's talk about false certifications and declarations now. What are those?
So think about medical records, property deeds, any kind of official document They all have the potential to be manipulated.
Right.
These offenses deal with situations where people abuse their authority or their position of trust to create fake documents.
So like a doctor giving someone a fake medical certificate.
Yes, exactly like that. The law sees that as a serious offense.
It is, because it could completely derail a case.
Absolutely.
It's about protecting those official records.
Right, making sure they can be trusted.
It's kind of scary to think how much damage just one fake document could cause.
It can be significant.
So we've got lying, fabricating, coercing, using fake stuff. What else is there?
Well, there's also hiding, destroying, or misrepresenting evidence.
Okay, so like making evidence disappear.
Yeah, exactly. And the punishment for that depends on how serious the crime is that they're trying to hide.
So hiding a parking ticket is different from hiding evidence of a murder.
Exactly. The text has a really clear example about someone helping a murderer hide a body.
Right.
To obstruct justice.
But it also says that even just withholding information you're legally obligated to give can get you into trouble.
It can, yeah.
It's amazing how many different ways there are to try to manipulate the legal system.
It is. It's complex.
Speaking of manipulation, what about those fraudulent actions related to legal proceedings?
Yeah, so this is about people trying to gain an advantage in a legal situation by being dishonest. Things like impersonating someone in court, making false claims, trying to get fraudulent judgments.
Okay, sneaky tactics.
Yeah, basically. There's a particularly interesting example in the text.
What's that?
It's about someone who's being sued, and they deliberately let the court rule against them for a larger amount than they actually owe.
Wait, why would they do that?
Well, they might do it to benefit themselves or someone else. It's a way of manipulating the system.
That's some clever legal maneuvering.
It is.
So we're not just talking about simple lies here.
No.
It's much more complicated than that.
It can be.
Okay, so what else? What other tactics do we need to be aware of?
Well, there's making false accusations and harboring offenders.
Okay, so accusing someone of a crime they didn't commit and protecting criminals from the law?
Yeah,
That's serious stuff.
it is. Making false accusations can have devastating consequences.
And harboring a criminal? Well, that's basically obstructing justice, right?
Exactly.
But there's an exception for spouses.
There is.
That's interesting.
It is. It raises all sorts of questions about loyalty and the complexities of those relationships.
Yeah, like that classic movie scene, I can't testify against my husband.
Right.
It makes you think.
It does.
Okay, so what about those offenses committed by public servants themselves?
Right. So this is about abuse of power and misconduct, specifically related to legal proceedings.
That's a whole other level of concern.
It is. These offenses really undermine public trust in the justice system.
So what are we talking about specifically?
Things like a public servant breaking the law to protect someone from punishment or to give them a lighter sentence.
Like a police officer letting a friend off with a warning.
Yeah, or a judge giving a lighter sentence to someone they know.
Right.
It's about using your position to manipulate the system.
It's corruption, pure and simple.
Exactly.
And then there's manipulating records, like changing official documents to influence a case.
That's right.
Planting a seed of deception right at the heart of things.
Yeah, it's a very serious offense.
Makes you wonder, you know?
What's that?
Do all public servants act in the best interest of justice?
It's a good question.
Or is there always potential for corruption?
It's something to think about.
It is, for sure.
These offenses highlight the fact that power, even legal power, can be misused.
That's a worrying thought.
It is.
But it's important to be aware of it.
Absolutely.
So we've talked about giving false evidence, fabricating, coercing, all that stuff. What about resisting arrest and helping someone escape?
Right. So those are actions that directly challenge the authority of the legal system.
So if you run from the police, you're not just making a bad situation worse.
No, you're committing a separate offense.
And that gets added to the original charges.
It does, yeah. It's like you're being punished for disrespecting the law.
And what about helping someone else escape?
Well, that also depends on how serious the crime was that they were being arrested for.
Okay, so helping someone escape from a parking ticket is different from helping a murderer escape.
Exactly.
It seems like the law is trying to be as fair as possible,
It is. It's about finding the right balance.
but still upholding those principles of justice.
Absolutely.
So there's this whole web of offenses designed to, mess with the legal process.
There's...
And it's more complex than it seems at first glance.
It is, and it's constantly evolving as new challenges arise.
Okay, so let's talk about conditional releases, like parole.
Yeah.
What happens when someone breaks those conditions?
Well, that's a serious issue. Conditional release is a privilege, not a right.
Right.
And if you break the rules, you can end up back in prison.
Things like breaking curfew or failing a drug test.
Exactly.
It's about giving people a second chance, but also making sure they stay accountable.
Right.
But it's not always a black and white situation, is it?
No, it's not. The law allows for some flexibility depending on what happened.
So they might just get stricter supervision or something.
They might, yeah.
Okay, so now let's talk about disrupting court and messing with the jury.
All right.
Things that really get in the way of a fair trial.
Exactly. We're talking about contempt of court and jury tampering.
So yelling at the judge or trying to bribe a juror.
Yes, those are both serious offenses.
They are. A fair trial depends on everyone following the rules.
It does.
And protecting the jury is really important.
It is. They need to be able to make their decision without any outside pressure.
Okay, one last thing. What about skipping bail?
Yes. That's a serious offense as well.
Because you're basically breaking a promise to the court.
Exactly.
And there are consequences for that.
There are.
It can mean fines, more jail time.
It can, yeah.
And it really undermines the whole system.
It can.
If people could just disappear after being released on bail, it would be chaos.
It would.
So this has been a really fascinating look at offenses against public justice.
It has.
And it's a lot more complicated than I think most people realize.
It is.
There are so many different ways to try to manipulate the system.
There are. But the law is constantly working to stay ahead of those trying to exploit it.
It's like a constant back and forth.
It is.
Well, I feel like I've learned a lot today.
I'm glad to hear that.
It's really eye-opening to see all these different offenses and how they can impact the pursuit of justice.
It is important to understand these things.
It is.
Because knowledge is power.
It is. So thank you so much for helping us navigate this complex world.
You're welcome.
And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you've learned something new and that you'll join us again next time.
It's a question that really gets to the heart of things, especially these days.
It does, yeah. It feels like we're drowning in information sometimes.
It's true with, the internet and social media and everything.
Exactly, and it's hard to know what's real and what's not. So where do we even begin?
Well, the first thing is to think about the source.
The source.
Where's this information coming from?
So, is it a reputable news organization?
Yeah, or a respected journal or a recognized expert.
Or is it just, some random person on the internet?
Exactly, or a blog with a clear agenda. You have to be careful about biases.
Right. Makes sense. But what if even credible sources disagree?
That's where critical thinking comes in.
Critical thinking.
You have to dig deeper.
Okay.
Ask the right questions.
Like what?
What evidence do they have to back up their claims?
Okay.
Is it based on facts, statistics, real expertise?
Or is it just, opinions and speculation?
Exactly.
So we need to be like detectives.
In a way, yeah.
Looking for clues.
Looking for the truth.
And if something seems too good to be true...
It probably is.
Probably is, yeah.
You've got to be skeptical.
Skeptical, but not, completely cynical.
Right.
Still curious.
Absolutely.
So it's about being active in how we consume information.
Exactly. Not just passive.
Not just taking everything at face value.
Right.
We have a responsibility to think critically.
We do. To ourselves and to society.
Because otherwise we're just letting ourselves be manipulated.
Exactly. It's about making informed decisions.
Based on evidence, not just our feelings.
Exactly.
That's a really powerful thought.
It is.
It's not always easy to do, though, is it?
No, it's not, but it's a skill worth developing.
It is.
Absolutely.
So we were talking about those offenses committed by public servants.
Right.
And how serious they are.
They are very serious.
It's one thing for an individual to try to game the system.
Right.
But when it's someone who's supposed to be upholding the law?
That's a whole other level of betrayal.
It is. So let's take a closer look at those specific offenses.
Okay.
The ones outlined in sections 255 to 261.
Right.
These are all about corruption and misconduct by public servants.
Yes.
Actions that go against their duty to uphold the law.
Actions that undermine fair legal proceedings.
Exactly.
So we're talking about things like using your position for personal gain.
Or to protect others from justice.
Yes, the ultimate abuse of power.
It is. For example, Section 255 talks about a public servant breaking the law to protect someone from punishment.
Or to give them a lesser punishment than they deserve.
Right, like a police officer letting their friend off with a warning.
Or a judge giving a lighter sentence to someone they know personally.
It's about using your position to bypass the system.
It is.
And it's not just about protecting individuals.
No, it can also apply to protecting property.
Well, like if an official ignores evidence of environmental violations by a company.
Because they're getting bribes or have some financial interest in the company?
Right. That's corruption, pure and simple.
It is. Using your power to shield someone from consequences.
Exactly. And then there's Section 256, which is about manipulating records.
Right, so this applies to public servants who are responsible for creating official documents.
And they deliberately falsify those documents.
Yes.
For personal gain or to harm others.
It's about creating a false narrative.
So we're talking about things like forging evidence.
Yes.
Creating false reports.
Yes.
Creating false reports.
Yes.
Altering documents to change the outcome of a case.
Exactly.
It's like planting a lie right in the heart of the legal process.
It is, and it can have serious consequences.
It can. It makes you wonder how often this actually happens.
It's hard to say for sure.
But it's unsettling to think about.
It is.
We want to believe that public servants are always acting with integrity.
We do, but these offenses remind us that that's not always the case.
Right. Power can be a dangerous thing, even when it's in the hands of the law.
It can.
So it's important to be aware of these potential issues.
Absolutely.
To be vigilant.
And to hold those in power accountable.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about corruption, about abuse of power.
Right.
Now let's move on to actions that directly challenge the authority of the legal system.
Okay.
Things like resisting arrest and aiding in escapes.
So Section 262 deals with individuals who resist their own lawful arrest?
Okay, so if you run from the police, you're not just making a bad situation worse.
No, you're committing a separate offense.
Which gets added to the original charges.
It does.
It's like being punished for not respecting the law.
Exactly. And then Section 263 deals with interfering with the arrest of another person.
So helping someone escape?
Yes, or physically obstructing the officers making the arrest.
Or providing a suspect with resources to help them evade capture.
Right.
It's like being an accomplice to their escape.
Exactly. And the punishment for that depends on the severity of the crime the person was being arrested for.
So helping someone escape a parking ticket is different from helping someone escape a murder charge.
Right, the law takes that into account.
It seems like the legal system really tries to be fair.
It does. It tries to balance firmness with fairness.
It's not just about blindly punishing people.
No, it's about making sure the punishment fits the crime.
And upholding the principles of justice.
Absolutely.
This is all really fascinating, but it's also a bit overwhelming.
It is a lot to take in.
It is.
There are so many ways to try to manipulate the system.
There are.
But the law is constantly evolving.
To keep up with those trying to exploit it.
Exactly. It's a constant back and forth.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about conditional releases.
Like parole.
Yeah, parole. What happens if someone breaks the conditions of their release?
Well, as we mentioned before, conditional release is a privilege.
Right.
And it comes with certain responsibilities.
Like following a curfew or staying away from certain people or places.
Exactly. And if those conditions are violated,
then they could end up back in prison.
They could, yes. It's about maintaining accountability.
Right, giving someone a second chance, but making sure they don't abuse it.
Exactly. But it's not always black and white.
So there's some flexibility depending on what happened.
There is. The goal is to address the violation while still trying to promote rehabilitation.
It's about finding that balance again.
It is.
Okay, so let's move on to offenses that affect the court proceedings themselves. All right. Things like disrupting the court or trying to influence the jury.
So we're talking about contempt of court and jury tampering.
Contempt of court, so like shouting at the judge or refusing to follow their instructions.
Yes, anything that disrupts the order of the court.
And jury tampering, that's about trying to influence the jury's decision.
Exactly. Could be through threats, bribes, or even just providing them with information that shouldn't be considered.
So like trying to bribe a juror or slipping them some gossip about the defendant.
Right. The jury's decision should be based solely on the evidence presented in court.
Right. That's how we ensure a fair trial.
Exactly.
It's amazing how all these offenses, even the ones that might seem minor, are all connected.
They are. They all contribute to the overall integrity of the legal system.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
But there's one more offense I want to talk about.
All right.
Skipping bail.
Yes, that's a serious one. Section 269 deals specifically with that.
And it makes sense, right? You're released on bail, you promise to show up for your court date, and then you disappear.
It's a breach of trust.
It is.
And it disrupts the legal process.
So it's not just about avoiding the consequences of your own actions.
No, it also affects the court's ability to function properly.
And it undermines the whole idea of bail.
It does. Bail is based on the assumption that people will honor their commitments.
Right. It's a delicate balance.
It is.
So failing to appear in court has serious consequences.
It does. It can mean fines, more jail time.
Because you're basically thumbing your nose at the system.
Exactly.
Well, this deep dive has really been an eye-opener.
It has.
It's amazing how intricate the legal system is.
It is.
And how important it is to understand these offenses against public justice.
It is, because knowledge is power.
And the more we know, the better equipped we are to be informed and engaged citizens.
Absolutely.
Well, I've certainly learned a lot from this conversation.
I'm glad to hear that.
And before we wrap things up, I have one more question.
Okay.
Given all the complexities we've discussed, all the ways information can be manipulated and distorted, how can we become better at judging the information we encounter? How can we become more discerning?
That's a great question, and it's one that's more important than ever in today's world.
Yeah, so before the break, we were talking about how tough it can be to sort through all the information out there.
It really is. It's like a constant flood, isn't it?
It is, and it's not always easy to tell what's true and what's not. So how can we become better at figuring that out?
Well, we talked about checking the source,
Right.
but there's more to it than that.
Okay.
Think about a magic show.
A magic show.
Yeah, the magician pulls a rabbit out of a hat.
Right.
Everyone's amazed.
Yeah.
But a critical thinker, they wouldn't just accept it.
They'd want to know how it's done.
Exactly. They'd be looking for the trick, the method.
So we need to be like those critical thinkers.
We do. We need to apply that same kind of skepticism to the information we see every day.
So don't just believe everything you see.
Exactly. Don't just take it at face value.
Okay, so how do we do that?
Ask questions.
Questions like what?
Well, what's the agenda behind this information?
The agenda.
Yeah, who benefits from me believing this?
Oh, I see.
Is there another side to the story?
That's not being told.
Right.
So it's like we need to be a little suspicious.
In a way, yeah, like a detective.
Looking for clues.
Exactly. Because information is rarely neutral.
It's not.
No, there's always a context, a perspective, a motive.
Okay.
And we have to try to uncover that.
It's a lot of responsibility.
It is, but it's important. We have to be discerning.
About what we believe.
Exactly. We need to be sure our beliefs are based on evidence.
Not just on what we want to believe.
Exactly.
This deep dive has been really fascinating.
It has been interesting, hasn't
It
it?
has. And it's made me realize how easily justice can be manipulated.
It can be, yes.
And how crucial it is to think critically about everything.
It is. We have to be informed citizens.
We do. So thank you again for joining us today and sharing your expertise.
You're very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
It has. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of offenses against public justice.
We hope you found it enlightening.
We do. And we hope you'll join us again next time. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and keep diving deeper.